I'm so excited to have Terry here because we were talking about this fellowship, as Sonny was introducing me to the written plan that they had for it and talking a little bit about what they were hoping to accomplish. We had several trains of thought in mind. One was, do we provide young journalists of color, aspirational people who are sometimes even on the cusp of whether we want to stay in the business or whether we want to do something else? Do we provide them with skills building? Do we help them be better writers or better photographers or whatever it is that they want to do? Or do we provide them with a broader vision of what's possible, of who they can be? And so in my conversation with Terry, he summed it up absolutely brilliantly. He said, anybody in your newsroom or that you come across in life can teach you how to write an intro or how to, be a better interviewer, et cetera. But can you be a leader? Can you be someone who knows how to navigate the challenges? Can you be someone who helps lift someone else up? And so for me, that was the perfect way for us to cap 3 days of thinking deeply about our lives, our careers, about what we want to accomplish, about who we are. And I can't think of a better person to have that conversation with than Terence Samuel. His career has shown a lot of people what's possible in this industry and culminating in where he is right now as managing editor at National Public Radio. So let's give Terry a warm welcome and hear what he has to say.
Well, I'm going to do something terrible. And instead of just starting to talk, I'm going to pick on somebody. I'm going to pick on somebody I know and ask them a question that I think is the beginning of what we're going to talk about. Acacia. Can you tell me what was the biggest surprise or the thing that you've had the most fun with over these last 3 days?
I will say the biggest surprise, I just didn't expect everyone to be so candid and open and sharing their stories. And you would think, like, of course, we're journalists of color, so we have some similar struggles, but it did shock me to hear, just how deep they are and how similar we are in what we go through in the newsroom. So I would say that was shocking, that was exciting, not in a good way, but it really opens your eyes. You're like, you're not alone. So I'll say that.
So it sounds like you found your people.
Yeah, absolutely. I found my people. That's the shock.
So that's the thing about this business. You get into it, and you have all kinds of reasons. Some people just want to be on TV. Some people want to be great writers. I'm sure everybody in here wants to be a podcast producer or a host, which was not something anybody talked about when I was doing this. Rachel already started doing the years in the business thing. Let's just say it's been a long time for me. But there are two things that I think has kept me, I don't know, I probably think about leaving every day, but there are two things. One is you get to find your people. If you're lucky, there's a newsroom somewhere out there that's going to just open up for you, and you will have found the people who can teach you, who can teach you how to teach them, teach you how to lead, teach you how to serve, at the end of the day, whatever community it is that you're interested in serving. That's one part of it. The other part of it is just figuring out who it is that you are, what it is that is driving you to do this, what it is that makes you not just happy, but whole if you're doing it right. And finding ways to explore that every day. None of which I knew when I got out of college in New York City and got my first job at the Roanoke Times in Roanoke, Virginia. So I literally had a job at the corner of 42nd and 5th Avenue in New York, which some people will tell you is the center of the world. And the next thing I know, I was in a courthouse in Bedford County, Virginia, where it was about a year after I'd been there. And by this time, I was covering courts in Bedford County, schools in Bedford County. They had a county commission and a city commission. I was doing the planning commission. I was writing all the features. And I'd been there for like a year and a half. And one day I'm on the second floor of the courthouse, and I'm about to go in to the men's room. I don't know how I missed it. On the door, you could see, scraped out, colored. And I stopped and I go, oh my God, that's why there are 2 bathrooms here. There are 2 men's bathrooms on the second floor. I'd never noticed. And you suddenly realize that things change. Sometimes they change fast. Sometimes they don't change at all. Sometimes all they do is take the So anyway, I suddenly realized I was living in a different place. But my job at the Roanoke Times was to cover that county, which was completely foreign to me. But it taught me 2 things. One, how to listen to people and let them tell their stories in their own voices. And 2, why what we do is so critically important to people in their individual lives. And obviously what's been missing from the long history of journalism is that not every community got that same treatment. And we have to work hard to fix it. One of the things I think I said about how to survive in this business is to figure out what it is that you want to do, and then just, I used to say this, and I think I would say it just as a throwaway line. If I could write 1 good sentence a day, it would solve all my problems, because that's what I wanted to do. And I was not the reporter who wanted to bring down the government. I didn't want to be Woodward and Bernstein. I didn't want to work on investigations that lasted 10 hours. I wanted to write really well, and I wanted to be in the paper every day, and that meant being out every day. So in Philadelphia, that meant me writing about, I went to Philadelphia. I went to the Philadelphia Inquirer after the Roanoke Times. It meant everything about writing about kind of I am married to Rachel's very good friend, who is one of those people who wanted to bring down the government. And she covered the White House for years. And we met at the Philadelphia Inquirer, where she was covering the State House, and I was working Sundays covering parades. And everybody even I hated it. But if you know Philadelphia, it's one of those cities where every neighborhood, every community, they are tight. They are, it's like the best local newspaper city ever. Well, certainly was back in the 1800s when I was there. But we had this rule that if there was a parade, we would cover it. because it was a way to say to whatever community was having that parade that we cared, we understood. So, Puerto Rican Day Parade, Italian American Day Parade, St. Patrick's Day Parade, I mean, and in Philadelphia, Ukrainian Day Parade. I mean, every Sunday, I was like in some damn parade. I was like, you know what? Here's the thing about Sunday. There's not a lot of news. If I take these parade stories seriously, they're all on the front page. Monday morning, I'm a star. And I still bitched and moaned about getting off Sundays after a couple of years, but it really was a chance for me to show people that I could write. And so, I mean, a little bit of that is buying into the system. You know, the Inquirer was a writer's paper. You know, the Washington Post, when I was there, was a reporter's paper. But at the end of the day, figure out what it is that got you into this. The thing that, I mean, every day is going to be at least half frustration. But then there's the stuff that you work on, that you bring to this, that literally makes you happier. And so here's the thing that happened when I started, when I decided I was going to turn parade coverage into an art. Other people started wanting, say, hey, you want to trade your Sunday? My point being that a lot of the times when you chase what it is that you're interested in and work hard at it, you don't necessarily have to, you don't always just buy into the system, but you can sometimes change it. The Sunday horrible shift was not the Sunday horrible shift when I left it as when I joined it. So, I could go on and on and on. There are like 8 million more of these stories, but why don't I take some questions?
I'm going to jump in here because I want to bring up a couple of themes that the fellows have mentioned several times over the past few days. And one of them that really stands out to me is the challenge of objectivity, particularly for journalists of color. And so I want to put you on the spot a bit and ask you about January 6th. Where were you? But, and not so much that, you know, I don't need you necessarily to tell us about how it personally affects you, but when we talked about how journalists of color are supposed to put everything aside, no matter what we're feeling, no matter what we've been through, no matter what traumas that might be triggered, and we got to stay objective. So can you talk a little bit about that in your journey as a journalist?
I just don't have the objectivity discussion. I just don't do that. I think it's pointless. We're not objective. But I'm really good at trying to tell the story. And a lot of times the story is not about me. I mean, it gets to be a big problem when it's politics or when it's race, but we just do so much more than that. And a lot of what I think helped, so I'll answer the January 6th question at some point.
Yeah, take your time, take your time.
So here's what happens to me. I get out of college, I go to Virginia, great paper if you want to learn how to write, but I am a 22-year-old black man covering a county in far southwest Virginia where literally some guy says to me one day, we usually don't allow black people at the front, but you work for the paper, so sit up front. He was drunk. Everybody was horrified. I I don't know if I was offended, but I'm telling you the story, and it's 35 years ago, and so it made an impression. Two things happened. One, he got kicked out. Because at some point, that was as much my courthouse, was more my courthouse than it was his. And he literally had no power over me. The other thing that happened is that I'm sitting at my desk, and somebody comes over to me and says, there's a Klan rally in Bedford on Saturday. And they got to give it to me, because it's my county. Nobody else is doing this. Like, that might be different now, but it's mine. So I look at the thing, I call up the guy. I was like, my questions are, why Bedford County? How many people are you getting? What do you hope to achieve? All the logical things. There's a newspaper policy in place at that point that says, we should go to these rallies, we shouldn't give them a lot of attention, but we should be there just in case something stupid jumps off. That is based on a few years earlier in Greensboro, there was a Klan rally where nobody was kind of paying attention, and it got ugly. A couple of people died. So I don't know, the guy, I don't know, he obviously didn't know what I looked like when he was talking to me. In the spirit of not making too big a deal of this, I go to lunch with a colleague who is a columnist. He's like, I'll go with you. I'm wearing shorts, t-shirt. It's Saturday. Running shoes. I had hair, so I probably didn't wear a cap then. But again, I'm 23, and so we have the important part about the going to brunch first is the couple of Bloody Marys ahead of this assignment. Feeling good. So we show up, and there are the Klan people over there. There are the protesters who are against the Klan over there. And there are sheriff's deputies, all of whom I know because I cover the county. State police troopers, none of whom I know because they're not from there. And it's a big separation. So I talked to him yesterday. I'm going to introduce myself and say, he said there were like 200 people. There were like 10. So I start walking toward him. Shorts, t-shirt, running shoes. Black guy walking toward the Klan guy with his, he had the whole thing on. And I could just feel the state troopers just like, they're like, and this is the thing when you're like 23, right? I'm not worried. I am not worried that they're going to do anything to me. I take that back. I'm not worried that they're going to kill me. That's the difference. And just as I'm getting close enough, I hear this voice. And it goes something like this. Leave him alone. He all right. It's the sheriff. Just calling off the state troopers, just so they back up. And I walk up to the guy. He's all in ropes. He's got the whole thing going on. And then I realize, I don't know what I'm going to say here. So I do what I always do. It's like, hi, I'm Terence from the Roanoke Times. And black hand goes up. He doesn't know what to do. TV cameras, click, 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 click. I talk to that guy, and I tell the story about covering a Klan rally all the time. He had nothing to say. And I reported it. I didn't feel I didn't feel like I had a point to make beyond just the storytelling and making it short. But I also came away feeling that these people were really weak, really, really weak. And in some ways, all of this was kind of a death rattle. But I'm not objective about I'm not objective about a Klan guy. I'm not. But I could tell a story that I think reflected the reporting. Yes.
Did you shake your hand?
Yes.
He did. What was that like?
I think it was worse for him than for me, because he also didn't know what to do. I mean, and that's the thing about reporting. You just kind of thrust yourself into places. I mean, I don't know, walking in, I probably would have said, I hated that guy for who he was. That's not how I walked away. I was like, you really don't matter that much.
What was the story? Was the story at that point, and I know you said you went there with a columnist, and I am a columnist, so I wanted to know, like, did you do a story, and did your colleague do a column based off of it? And was the story just that, you went there and you shook his hand and nothing happened? Like,
No,
what was the...
My story was about the failed Klan rally in Bedford County. They said there were going to be 200. They said they came here because there was a history of this kind of activity. I mean, all that stuff, real stuff. I mean, the reason they were coming here is because they think you people are racist. So, just know that everybody knows that. That there were more people protesting than actual Klan people, that they dragged out all this law enforcement that cost taxpayers a bunch of overtime and money. And it was, 6 inches, and I was done. The columnist who wrote Monday, Wednesday, and Friday did a story that talked about how pathetic it was, and did all that stuff that columnists do.
So do you believe in a bright line between columns and reporting? Do you feel like they should be completely separate? So are journalists commenting on something like that?
Yes and no. I don't think it was that important for me to say in that particular instance how pathetic it was. I mean, if I was doing, had I decided then that we wanted to look at why these people chose this place, and we were doing a whole lot of stuff, I would have talked about kind of the numbers versus the reality and the obvious failure of that. The thing that always gets you through is the truth. And the way that is key is, it's true that they were pathetic, but it wasn't true that they were, the fact that they were pathetic was not a truth that was important to my particular story. And you gotta pick. And you gotta be able to sleep with yourself.
Can you compare to covering the KKK back then and versus covering January 6th?
So, two big differences. One story was literally unimportant. That KKK story was not important in a lot of ways. It was a vestige of something. It was a flicker of something. We treated it that way. January 6th, there's like a whole suite of really important issues that we need to address. One is kind of how there's a movement that happened in the last few years that basically kind of revived what we didn't cover, what I didn't cover back in whenever that was. I mean, those were the exact same sentiments that were suddenly abroad in the land, everywhere from the White House to everybody who went to that rally. And so, and the guy who didn't know how to shake my hand was inconsequential versus the President of the United States, who was central to that story. In some ways, no comparison. January 6th was not an either-or story. It wasn't like it was an insurrection, but it was tourists. It wasn't. I mean, it was all the reporting, and I am a reporting fundamentalist, I like to say. Just don't tell me what you think. Tell me what you found out. And then I will know what you think. It doesn't matter. And the reporting shows that they were literally trying to overthrow the government.
Jarrell Arvin from Vox.com. We've heard the idea of truth come up a couple times in the past few days. And I don't know, I have a complex relationship with the truth, because I feel like, a couple years ago, talking about what's true and what's not is a lot easier than it is now. And one person can have a perception of something, the same exact event, and it's true to them and true to what they saw, but you can also see something completely different. So I'm wondering if you could talk about how you discern what's true. Yeah.
So one, you recognize that there are degrees of complexity. Acacia is wearing a striped shirt.
You can say it's a blouse.
So let's say that what she's wearing is important. And somebody says it's a shirt. And somebody says, no, it's a blouse. That's where you talk to everybody and say, well, why do you think it's a blouse? This person says it's a shirt. And when it's not politics and when it's not race, you could actually have a legitimate conversation and come to some close place. The thing is, when it gets invested with all the other things, then it's a much more heated conversation, and sometimes there's no resolution to it. I'm old, and I'm gonna claim that as my pretext for saying what I'm about to say. Sometimes we overthink it, though. Sometimes we know exactly what the truth is, and we want to have an argument, but we know where it's going to end up. And it takes a little bit of guts and maybe a little bit of experience to go, you know what? No, this is the truth. And I would say that's something to work on so that you can just make that call.
I have two questions for you. The first is something we've talked about a lot so far this week, which has to do with the mistrust in the media, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what we should be doing and what our responsibility is for rebuilding that trust.
I don't know why whenever we talk about mistrust in the media, I want to talk about Twitter. I think what you do is you do the work. You do the work. I mean, I don't think there's any other solution. I mean, you're just competing with so much. There's so much stuff. Some of it's important, some of it's not. And I think for those of us in this business, what you do is you work really hard at trying to figure out what it is that's important and do the work. And so my solution to the mistrust in media problem is to double down on things that we always do and recognize that part of what we have to do in addition is combat this misinformation campaign. And it's not fun, and I'm not sure we're winning, but I don't have another solution.
I also wanted to ask your advice on covering white supremacy today, if you have any words of advice to give us on that.
I'm sorry.
If you have any advice to give us on covering white supremacy.
One, don't do it if it's going to cause you like personal pain. I mean, it's just not worth it. And the other thing is, recognize that it's everywhere, and there are all kinds of ways to do it. And there's not like a fix. It's like wash, rinse, repeat. And the next time there's less of it around. And the other thing is to be not so personally affronted by it, which is a hard thing to do. But literally going back to that Klansman, I was like, oh, this is what this is about. Let's move on.
I actually wanted to go back to something you were saying to Jarrell. Sometimes we overthink it. I think I personally struggle because sometimes I'll write a story, like especially about like these voting laws, and I'll call it a voter suppression law in my stories. And I know my editor will always, or the copy editors, someone's going to change it to like a law that restricts voting. But like sometimes I feel like I personally, right, like not as a journalist, but as a human, I feel conflicted. I'm like, but we all know these laws are designed to prevent Black and brown people from voting. Like, we know what's up, and sometimes I struggle. And so I'm asking for your advice when you're like, we see what's happening, like thinking about January 6th, like a lot of us who are brown and Black saw this coming. It wasn't really a shock, but like, I couldn't write a story like that because I know no editor would go for it. And I especially like thinking about the midterms in 2024, it's like, we see our democracy crumbling, and even when I try to like write it in a story, it gets toned down, and sometimes I'm uncomfortable with that, and I don't know if you have any advice like on how to navigate that.
Well, if it's important to you, don't stop doing it. 2, I mean, there are people who will say it, and there are ways to demonstrate that it is what it is. I don't have good advice, except to keep fighting it and be prepared to lose until you win. We all know what's happening. Just let's keep showing people what's happening. Let's just keep showing them and showing them. And I'm not going to say don't put it in because you can do it another way, but I would say do it another way. And this is not on the same scale, but I had this friend, Robin Clark, who said he would literally write his lead as the second graph and put something at the top. What he called it a bouquet, because and this is a quote, because whoever the asshole editor was always going to take off the top, and you got to fight back the way you know how.
Thank you again. My name is Rafael Carranza. I'm a reporter for the Arizona Republic. I think we've also had conversations with each other and have shared how we also, in our newsrooms, have dealt with, microaggressions, or, they place expectations on us, or, feelings of being undervalued. And over time, some of those things, can contribute to that feeling of, questioning our future in journalism. But you mentioned earlier that, it might be a matter of finding, the newsroom that will appreciate those things. And so my question to you is, in your experience, what are some of those flags that you should look out for when, that you should be on the lookout for to know when it might be time to leave that newsroom?
My better advice is figuring out how to stay when you think this is your newsroom and people are trying to make it feel like it's not. And that's where you need your people. Because the truth is, jumping from place to place is often not the solution. If you can find the people who can help you grow, the people who can support you, and the people who basically understand your dreams and ambitions, keep them close and use them well. And then, just the people you need. And that's about the journalism. That's the person who can say, this sentence is too long, this graph needs to go here. People who just talk to you seriously about the work. And then there are people who just know what it's like to be you in this space and how important that is. And those people become kind of your lifelong friends. I mean, the best piece of journalism advice I ever got was from Les Payne, who said, newsrooms are not built to teach you anything. It's not built to transmit information in a way from the people who know it to the people who are trying to learn it. And that's especially true for people of color because what has traditionally happened is it gets transmitted, but it gets transmitted in it's the oral tradition or spoken word. So, if you and the managing editor go out for drinks, or if you sit next to the guy who is the investigative superstar, that's how it transmits. We often didn't get to sit in those places. But what Les said is, if you see something that you like, that you want to learn, steal it from them. Literally go up to them and say, can you help me do this? Or find a way to just take what you need. And the more you do that, the more empowered you are, the more you feel like you belong. And that is very transferable.
I ask this question to a lot of people who are far more experienced than I am, but in your view, what is the most kind of pressing issue right now for our work, our industry?
You mean as in things we should cover?
No, I mean that, it could be that, but I'm thinking more big picture.
I would say if you guys are not excited and hopeful about the business, we're doomed. And to the extent that that's true, we got to fix it, and we got to fix it fast.
Let me ask you to be more specific. Do you mean young journalists or young journalists of color?
I mean young journalists, recognizing that hope is always kind of a scarcer commodity.
The reason I ask that, though, is because, again, we're at such an inflection point in this society, and we talk about the threat to democracy, and we talk about the racial reckoning and whatever. And the reason this fellowship came together was in direct response to the fact that there need to be people of color in newsrooms to help tell these stories, so that if we don't stay, or if we all abandon it, or if we find that there aren't the supports in newsrooms to keep us there, we're in trouble. The industry is in trouble.
Yeah, and it's worse than that. Look, yes, there are threats to democracy and racial reckoning and all of that stuff. But for this generation of journalists, it's their story. I mean, we're saying it's threats to democracy, but it's whatever they decide it's going to be. And if they leave, then those stories don't get told, and we cannot afford that.
If hope is necessary for the future of journalism and hope is a skill, how do we build that skill? How do we practice hope?
You guys haven't met my daughter, but she would say, you're going to answer that question, aren't you? I do believe hope is necessary for the future of journalism, but it's also, I think, my own personal superpower. I like to say, actually, what I like to say is my superpower is baseless optimism. How do you build it? Do things, just the more stuff you do, even if it's wrong, even if it doesn't turn out exactly the way, taking action, that story that you're kind of dreaming of that you should do, but you can't figure out how, do it and bomb. And then do it again and bomb a little less. And what that does is it kind of like flexes a muscle in you that is increasingly resistant to whatever bullshit is going on in your newsroom. And then you find allies who are willing to do the same thing. And a funny thing happens. You start being hopeful outside your newsroom as well.
One more.
Hi, thank you so much for coming to speak to us. I actually wanted to circle back to your response to Hiba's question, where you talked about how, the journalism industry as a whole is in trouble if young people, aren't, don't have any hope and aren't willing to kind of stay in the industry. And I kind of wanted to go back and kind of, in my experience and from what I've seen, many young journalists have a lot of challenges and barriers. And when we've had several discussions throughout these sessions, and as Acacia mentioned, a lot of us had very similar challenges, as well as some of our speakers. We had our first speaker on the first day who talked about his challenges in the 1970s, and a lot of us, had the similar experiences. And from what I've seen from people who have spoken up to management and things like that, it's not met with resistance, but more so met with justification that 30, 40 years ago, they experienced the same thing, so in a way, it's a rite of passage. What is kind of being done to kind of mitigate these challenges so that young people feel incentivized to stay?
I don't think it's a rite of passage, and I'm not sure that you guys are not hopeful. I'm saying, if you're not hopeful, we have a problem. I think there's a lot of evidence that you are. Look, I think the challenges are different. I would say in some ways the challenges are maybe not, you can make the argument that they're not as huge, but I don't think that's a particularly useful conversation. I would say the justification comes from people seeing things through their own frame. So the justification is just that. It's a rationalization of how they see the world. I think the thing that managers need, and that I push all the time, is that frame is by necessity changing, and it's not up to us to change it. It's happening because you guys are changing it. And in some ways, that's not that different from a generation ago. And take it and run with it. It's changing, and you're dealing with people who are kind of hanging on to power, and that's what always happens. But it's going to be yours.
Terry started this session by asking Acacia a question that yielded a very important response. She said, feels like we found our people. Terence Samuels is our people. I think his intellect, his insight, his
humor,
charm, wit, grace, is exactly how we needed to bookend this experience. Terence is on the board of NPF, but more importantly, he's just a role model and a touchstone for all of us in this journey. So I want to take this moment now to show him our appreciation.
Wait. I gotta answer the January 6th question. So you guys were talking about objectivity and neutrality, and I said I don't play that. It's just not. it's in some ways an intellectual exercise that often does not play out on the ground. Your story being the exception. The thing about January 6th was, for me, I was not at the Capitol, but I covered Congress for years and years. And I was literally sitting there going, this is not really happening. This is not really happening. And that's the kind of story where you're not objective. I was like, oh, I've been in that hole. I've been in that hole. The other story where we have not been objective because it's touched all of our lives is COVID. And I've said, we were covering that story as we were living it. I mean, we were literally flying that plane as we were building it. On January 6th, I was in my basement on my couch recovering from COVID after having spent 2 days in the hospital. So yeah, I'm fine. But my point is, objective, I mean, we were writing about what the COVID protocols were with dextromethasone and remdesivir, and I got them both.
And you got a story to tell from it.
And go out and tell stories that only you can tell. That's my
And
final
on
word.
that note, let us thank you so much for being
Thank
with
you.
us.